We got John Grove on Locked On Big 12 today from Wildcat 91.9 FM. John, the college football playoff, new format, 12 teams this year. 11 of those will come from Power 5 Power 4 conferences. The Big 12 could feasibly, they're going to get one in for certain. A top 4 seed here, they got to buy. If Kansas State wins the Big 12, they get to buy in. If Kansas does, or Utah, whoever. Then, in my dream scenario, you're going to have to talk me off the ledge here. In my dream scenario, it is a couple of 11-1 Big 12 teams are competing for the Big 12 championship, and the winner goes obviously to the playoff. The loser, sitting at 11-2, also gets a spot in that 8-9 range or 7-6 range or wherever. And in a dream scenario, we have 12-0, 11-1, 11-1. Somebody, that 11-1, is kept out of the Big 12 championship. They're the 11th overall team. How do you leave an 11-1 team out of the college football playoff? The other two compete at the very top, like Kansas State and Utah are both 11, or one's 12-0, one's 11-1, and West Virginia is 11-1. Now, I think all three of those teams make a case to get in, especially if you have a couple of 12-1s and an 11-1. I mean, there is a route, and I know I'm piecing it together. There's a route where the Big 12 gets not just 2, but 3, when a whole lot of talking heads say the conference will only get 1.
Well, Drake, looking at a little bit of what you were talking about, Robert, you mentioned about a dream scenario where you're able to get the maximum of 3 teams in. I think your mark would have to be known as the king of all realignment commissioners at this point, knowing that you got 3 teams in the playoff. That's going to generate a lot more revenue, but it's not going to be as easy as you said. And you mentioned as well, how are we going to leave out an 11-1 third place, second place Big 12 team? Well, it's just now it's the media people that are starting to take notice of these Big 10 or SEC programs it's programs like Texas, USC, and all those Michigan winged helmets. They're going to value the logo on the side of a helmet more, just knowing about the prestige and brand. I think that's something that kind of caught Florida State a little bit off guard this past season, having to play several ACC teams, and Alabama was given the nod. But this year, you're going to 12 teams. You're going to get an automatic team from the Big 12 in. But in order to truly find a way to try and get 2 to 3 teams in the playoff, I think it really first starts with winning several big key non-conference games. That will really compare you apples to oranges, like the Big 12 and the Big 10 and the Big 12 and the SEC, especially with the Big 10 where you have Penn State traveling to West Virginia. Personally, I think that's going to be the most important non-conference game of the Big 12 that season, knowing that if you're able to pull off a giant win, you can look at Penn State saying, oh, they're a massive brand, but they lost to a Big 12 school in West Virginia. I mean, maybe Iowa and Iowa State, same thing there, UCF in Florida, but it boils down to winning several of these big non-conference games to really catch the eyeballs of the media pundits and everybody everywhere that continue to just talk about the Big 10 and the SEC. And I think right now the narrative is so heavily leaning towards the Big 10 and the SEC, I don't necessarily see a 2 or a second team or a third team right now in the playoff mix. I think there's going to have to be possibly the best case scenario for all of it to kind of fold. I think they need multiple SEC teams to go 3 losses, 4 losses, something like that. I don't know, Drake. It's kind of an uncertainty about what's going to occur, but yeah.
Is there a world, and maybe this is an easy answer too, where an 11-1 Big 12 team like West Virginia gets left out for 10-2 Missouri, who didn't go to the SEC championship?
That's a good question. I think it kind of goes back to what we mentioned about the resumes of each team's schedule. And another thing to point out with West Virginia as well, they're one of the rare Big 12 teams that aren't listed as one of the easiest schedules, because they got 2 Power 5 teams on their non-conference schedule in Penn State and Pittsburgh. They go to Pittsburgh while they're hosting Penn State. You're looking at several of these teams, especially with their non-conference resumes. Missouri, I mean, they have Boston College. There you go. I mean, but they have a really easy 6 to 7 game stretch to start the season before they run into Alabama. How much it really comes down to how much the College Football Playoff Committee is going to truly put a value on the strength of the conferences Whereas you're going to see just like the SEC patches on several of these teams, even though they got like a Missouri who's got kind of an easy gateway through his schedule. And hopefully just knowing that the Big 12 is going to be competitive, is going to be a lot of evenly leveled teams of West Virginia, Utah, Oklahoma State, Iowa State. If you're able to pull off several big non-conference wins, and if you're able to do your part, go 12-0, 11-1, and you see multiple SEC, Big Ten teams with 2 or 3 losses, I think that gives you a better opportunity of possibly further elevating your status as not just an athletics program or football program, but more so for the conference as well.
Is parity going to hurt this league when it comes to the college football playoff?
That's what they said when the Big East was still a conference, when it was at 8 teams. Yeah. It felt like as if anybody could beat anybody on a year-to-year basis. From a realignment standpoint, that didn't necessarily work out, but we're talking about a different scenario here. I think right now it's the lack of prestigious brands that is hurting the Big 12, not necessarily from a competitive standpoint. I
exposure standpoint for sure. You know, I mean, if you were to point at the Big 12 conference and say, who is your king? Who is the big dog? There isn't one. And you could go to the ACC and say, okay, there's still 2, though they're suing the league and leaving. It's Texas and Oklahoma were vying for that spot year in and year out. Even when Texas sucked, they still had the brand. And the SEC, you could point to whoever's winning the national championship. And the Big Ten is 3 teams, really 2 teams at the very top. And the Big 12 doesn't have that. So I think from the parity standpoint, even kind of going back to what you alluded to, that it is, if you eat yourself alive, you're not going to have any representation of the college football playoff except for the teams at the top. So maybe it's time to root for some stars of the Big 12. One of those stars might be Kansas State. Coming up, Kansas State will win this conference. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. I'm going to see Tyler Childers play live in Idaho in a couple of weeks, and I'm excited to see Tyler Childers play live in Idaho, but I don't have Tyler Childers live in Idaho tickets. Why? Because Game Time is where I go to buy my tickets, and I don't have to stress about doing that 4 months in advance. Because with last-minute deals at Game Time, save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. So I'm going to go to the concert. I'm going to be like outside of the concert going, pit tickets. Way cheaper than they were yesterday. Click. Flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Lowest price guaranteed, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time ticket exchange coverage too. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the industry. Right now, take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download Game Time today. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That is code LOCKEDONCollege at Game Time on the app right now. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, and that is guaranteed.